I contribute a lot of my poise and grace to my upbringing with my parents because they both went through segregation, schools segregated to schools unsegregated. It's only one generation away. And so despite all the challenges they went through, they still taught myself and my brothers love.
And welcome back. You're listening to Hysteria, the podcast for people who would love to see the news business unfucked. Our first guest is a founding editor of the news publication The 19th. She's an award-winning journalist who's worked at places like the Associated Press, the LA Times, and the Washington Post. Erin Haines, welcome to Hysteria.
Thanks for having me, and not a moment too soon.
Well, it's good to have you back. I just have to say really quick, the moment in the documentary that we're about to discuss where you're yelling at Steve Kornacki.
Yes, we loved it.
We texted about it. It made the text chain, Erin. It was a brilliant moment. I was like, see, look, this brilliant journalist agrees.
Just the facts, Steve. Just the facts. I don't want the what if wall.
Punchy Erin is the best Erin.
We loved it.
We absolutely loved it. Our next guest is a filmmaker, entrepreneur, and activist dedicated to advocating, especially for women of color. She's one of the filmmakers behind the documentary about the 19th, Breaking the News. Princess Hairston, welcome to Hysteria.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad that you guys are both here. The documentary was one of those inspiring things that afterwards I was like, what? I need to set some goals.
I became very emotional. I got teary-eyed like several times.
Was it because of my hairstyles?
No, those kept me locked in, Erin. Those kept me locked in.
Okay, so the documentary starts several years ago when you were preparing to launch the website. What was happening that made you both think we need to capture this? Like, Erin, were there any moments you saw cameras around and you thought, this may have been a terrible idea?
Absolutely. But also, we were a startup. We launched a week before the Iowa caucuses and frankly had no PR budget. And so, the documentary filmmakers came to us and said, we'd love to tell the story of the 19th, whatever that's going to be. And we're like, yeah, sounds good to me. I think this could potentially work out for us and get our story out to a much wider audience. So, yeah, I mean, we said yes, but also in that moment, we're thinking, yes, come follow us on the 2020 campaign trail, right? And help us kind of document this very consequential election. But, by the time we really got rolling, the pandemic had hit and, Joe Biden's in the basement and we're trying to figure out, if we're still going to have a newsroom, much less, how to cover it if we are still going to have one. Yeah, I think we had to pivot. The film team had to pivot. And our story became very different than what we initially thought it was going to be. Also, a year's worth of Zoom footage is, maybe compelling for some people, but doesn't necessarily make a documentary. So, yeah, I mean, as 1 year turned into 2 years, turned into 3 years, there definitely were moments where I was just like, OMG, I can't believe this is still happening. But also, I will say, now that we are on the other side of this, just having this historical record, not only of our first 3 years as a newsroom, but also really those 3 years of our democracy, like having that kind of enshrined in this way just feels very special and meaningful. And that is not something that a lot of news organizations, frankly, can point to and have.
Yeah. Well, from the documentary team side, we have 3 directors, Heather Courtney, Chelsea Hernandez, and myself. And, as documentarians, when we approach people for a film, people may not know all of that goes into creating a documentary, how many times you have to film them, how you have to film the pivots and the changes. And it was also a global pandemic. So it was so challenging. We were strict about trying to follow COVID-19 protocols. And we were really the only people that were inside the journalists' homes during early stages and, dual pandemics, shutting down, going back, thinking that journalists are going to be out in the field and going back in. And again, the film started with really how the 19th was going to cover the 2020 election different than legacy newsrooms. How were they going to be different? How can we see that change and the necessary change that needs to be seen in legacy newsrooms? And the pandemic started, it was like, whoa, what are we dealing with? And the whole trajectory of the film changed. The whole log line of the film changed. And so, it started with Heather Courtney, then Heather brought on Chelsea and brought on myself to really mirror what she saw the 19th doing behind the scenes. So our film team very much mirrors the 19th. And we have a lovely producer, Diane Kwan. And we all have different lived experiences, different backgrounds, different races. So there were so many challenges along the way. And we were like, hoping that the 19th team would let us keep filming them during all of the pivots, because they, then Roe versus Wade came in, and that was our act 3, and we had to keep filming. And we saw how the 19th was really covering things very differently. So it happens in documentary, and usually documentaries take a couple of years.
Erin, the name of your news organization is The 19th, but with an asterisk. Can you explain to listeners the significance of the asterisk and how the stated goal of intersectionality evolved over time?
Alyssa, I would be happy to. Thank you so much for asking.
Set and Spike.
Our newsroom, The 19th, for people who don't know, is named for the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which guaranteed the right for some, but not all women to have access to the vote when that amendment was passed in 1920. And so, in thinking about this newsroom, coming up with what we wanted to stand for and even what to name our newsroom, we did grapple a bit with the 19th's complicated history. And, what we came up with, what I actually suggested as we were kind of conceiving of the, what the 19th was going to be, was to put an asterisk on our logo, right? And so if you've seen our logo, there's an asterisk there in recognition of, frankly, the Black women who were thrown under the bus when the 19th Amendment was initially passed. And, it's in recognition of the Latinas and the Asian American women who, faced barriers. It's in recognition of the indigenous women who were not even recognized as citizens in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. And so for us, that asterisk also helps us as a newsroom kind of think about who continues to be unseen and unheard in our democracy. And that asterisk also has guided us along our journey, as we now head into year 5 of the 19th, which is crazy to think about. But, we initially were very much thinking about our newsroom as being focused on women in politics. But, as we have grown, as we have added folks with different lived experiences, thinking much more broadly about gender and the role of gender in this country, and the idea that you don't just have to be a woman for your gender to impact how you were able to participate in this democracy, that race is also a part of this conversation, that class is also a part of this conversation. The asterisk in a lot of ways just is a reminder of that history, but also just kind of a North Star for us editorially.
And Princess, as an outside observer to the launch and the struggles and successes of the 19th, did you have a moment where you knew you were observing something truly important, or a moment that you knew would be pivotal?
I think it's a couple of moments. You got to look at it from a couple of lenses, not just the changes in in legacy newsrooms and the media, what the 19th was doing, but they were a startup. They were a startup with women and LGBTQ plus folks. It was, are they really going to make it? I mean, seeing Emily trying to fundraise, and she's amazing at it. But truly, like, newsrooms were closing. Like, we were reading articles like shut down, no longer employed. I mean, newsrooms, it was just a scary time. So every time that they would grow, like bring on another reporter, and I was like, oh my God, like they're secretly doing it behind the scenes. Like, we're watching them, progress in a way that many are not. It also speaks to like the go-getter spirit of women, period, like what women can do when they lead, when they're in positions to lead, what folks from gender nonconforming, or what gender equity means, and how it's not just a he versus she, and so, but I do think it is so different. The whole landscape of any change is different when mainly women are at the forefront. And I think that was just truly remarkable to see in the film. And then I think when they were covering Roe versus Wade, that was a huge pivotal moment to see some of those articles, how they were different, how the headlines are different from the 19th News organization versus other newsrooms. And I think those were very pivotal changes or very pivotal moments to recognize.
Princess, I just wanted to go back really quickly to something you said about the timing of when you started following them and how it aligned with the beginning of the pandemic. I think watching this, I saw that you captured a moment in American women's lives where responsibilities and expectations that are normally put on them were just multiplied. Like there were kids running around in the background and a lot of, kids coming into shots and like screaming as their mom is trying to raise money for this startup that she's doing. And it really, I thought, was a powerful visual reminder of how the pandemic made us all think like how much of this country is sitting on the shoulders of women whose labor is just sort of expected and not necessarily compensated. And it was really like, I thought that part of the documentary was really special. I just wanted to compliment you on the footage that you all captured. It was really special and powerful, even though it wasn't necessarily something that was being commented on all the time on screen. Erin, your reporting on Breonna Taylor really kind of catapulted the 19th to a lot of people's awareness. Tell us about stories that you feel urgency to report on.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, especially as we come so close to the anniversary of that tragic event. It was a story that I was really proud to be able to tell and proud that we as the 19th were able to tell, but obviously one that I wish that I'd never had to write because, she would still be here. A big reason why I wanted to come to the 19th was because I did want to center Black women's stories, not as kind of this side thing that was happening in our country, in our democracy, but really as one of the central storylines, absolutely, of our politics, but also in terms of just this moment in time. We are, the rallying cry in 2020, was listen to Black women. What does that look like for us to take that seriously, to be able to really talk about their lived experience, to be able to normalize their leadership, right? I wanted to be able to do that in a way that felt consequential. And so, when I am able to do that here, it really does feel like my best and highest use as a journalist. And also, the reality is I was a reporter for much of my career. And so to go from that to being, a founder and also just one of the highest ranking Black women, frankly, in journalism and political journalism, like that representation matters a lot to me too. And it is not something that I take lightly.
And you were the first journalist to interview VP Kamala Harris after the election.
Yeah.
What was that moment like?
Fun fact, Erin, I'm told that I have the record for interviews of the vice president at this point in my career. And that is with us, being a newsroom that's only 4 years old. So that's kind of cool. But
that's awesome.
That's really cool.
Seriously.
I did not realize that. I do talk to her often because, again, like the most powerful woman in the country is a Black woman. And that is something that I did not think I was going to be able to say in my lifetime. It's certainly not something I thought I was going to cover in my lifetime. Landing that interview, we were a really, really young newsroom when that happened. I mean, literally our website had gone live the same week that we did that interview. Right. Wow. And so, I didn't know if she was still going to do it. Then candidate Biden nominates her to be the vice president. I'm like, oh gosh, is her number even still going to be working? But it was, and she absolutely not only committed to doing that 30-minute interview with us, but we were the first outlet that she spoke to. And that was absolutely intentional, I think, because of the way that I had covered her. I covered her presidential campaign. And actually, the very first story that I wrote for the 19th was about why I thought that her presidential campaign didn't have a chance to take off, namely because of her race and gender, not because of the other things that some other outlets were writing about in terms of her message or momentum or money or any of those things.
Which, Erin, I just have to say, she had the best announcement event and best announcement speech of anybody who launched that year.
It was a front runner kind of event. It really was.
Totally.
And so to be at that point a year later, where voters didn't even get to weigh in on her in a primary, really unpacking what that was about, and then just the trajectory several months later, race and gender go from being her biggest liability as a presidential candidate to her biggest asset in that whole Veep stakes conversation. Being able to write about that, I felt like really did kind of position me well to land that interview. So for the 19th, it was certainly a big deal, and for me personally, as a journalist, it was a pretty big career moment.
Yeah, and Princess, what was that moment like to witness as a documentarian?
Well, this took a collective effort of filmmaking. We actually had multiple ways of filming. During the pandemic, if we could not travel, we sent a camera for Erin to self-tape, to Chabeli to self-tape. Important moments where everything was shut down, we needed to capture the early moments of Emily starting this up, Sophie running around. We had to ask her husband, who was also in media, to film some of those moments and give us footage. And so there was a whole producing chain with all the directors where if we could not get somewhere, we had to send cameras. We had to get people who were really close by. And so, some of the moments we were capturing so much. We're following journalists across states. We're following the founders. Some of the moments we really didn't truly know that we had that were so special until we got in the edit room and started seeing things come together. We had forgotten that we had the Breonna Taylor moment. It was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah.
I can't believe you had that.
Thank goodness we sent Erin that camera to lay on that bed and just self-reflect and do some of those things. It was, those are things you have to think about as a filmmaker. There's so much money and time and preparation that goes into it. So it's a large team to think.
Erin, you said in an interview on the day the election was finally called, I think I have this right, of Kamala Harris, quote, "History delayed will not be history denied." And you did something incredibly historic that actually wasn't part of the documentary. You traveled with the VP on her first trip to Africa. So one, what did you see? What was that like? And two, do you think Kamala is covered fairly?
Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to get into it.
There you go.
That trip to Africa was actually, it was just about almost a year ago, ago next month. When she became vice president, I knew that there were two big trips that I absolutely wanted to go on. Like if I did nothing else, I knew that she was going to go to the continent at some point, and I know that she's going to go to India at some point. And I wanted to see what that looked like, how her leadership was being regarded on the world stage, right? And she's been on the world stage a lot, since she's been vice president. But that trip felt significant to me. It was also my first time on the continent. So personally, it had significance. There was also just a lot of chatter at that time about her leadership. Where is she? What is she doing? That kind of thing. And so I wanted to show what that looked like outside of this country and outside of this context, right? Because I think for a lot of people, the role of vice president, normally in this country, that's not something that we feel like is very important. But for the second most important person in the United States to go to these African countries, like she's representing the United States for these people. She's representing the possibility of partnership and opportunity and all these other things. So she was a very big deal to those people. And to be, for example, kind of in the press motorcade and going from location to location and just seeing the streets lined with all of these Black people who just wanted to get a glimpse of her, right? Welcoming her to the continent as their sister. She had a familial connection in Zambia where her grandfather had done some governmental work. So it was a different way to kind of get to know her, but also to see her leadership in a way that we really don't see it here. There were, a handful of us that were part of the American press corps that were following her around, but the African media that turned out to cover her on all of these stops, I mean, dwarfed us by many, many, many people. So that was really a moment for me that reframed just kind of globally, what that discussion looks like. And look, I mean, in terms of how I think she's been covered, I think it's absolutely legitimate, just given, a couple of historic things about the nature of this administration, namely that, President Biden is the oldest president that we've ever had. And also that she is a historic first in this kind of traditional role, right? So this is somebody who could potentially be president, depending on events. And so does that mean that we have an obligation to get to know this person? Does that mean that we have an obligation to think about how this person might govern? Absolutely. Is that the conversation that I think that we're always having? I do not. And I think that we, as a political press corps, there can be coverage that only furthers the othering of her, when what our coverage needs to be doing is familiarizing people with her and who she is, right? To say, when the American people say, well, I don't really know where she is, I don't really know what she's doing. How much of that is on us as a press corps? We're making choices about who to cover. Traditionally, we don't cover a vice president, but for somebody in a historic role like this, people want to see what she's doing. They don't care what it is that she's doing. They just want to see her doing it because nobody that looks like her has ever done it before.
Princess, you specifically work in every aspect of your life and career to create inclusive spaces. So can you talk to us about how you saw the 19th evolve over the course of shooting, from how they interacted as an organization to what they covered?
You saw how the 19th really started or did the work to be inclusive is some of the early discussions where people with lived experiences may not have understood how important this story was, having those important discussions around the Central Park Karen, Breonna Taylor. Is this an important story for us to tell? If you, I think it's also how they listened to each other, how they were growing and listening to each other, how the gender equity discussion came in when Kate was brought on, and how Kate challenged the leadership at the 19th to rethink how they were even engaging amongst each other, the language that was being used. These are all the things that most people in orgs and corporations have not been doing. It is always the people who come from marginalized communities that are doing the work to affect change. And, it's daunting. And you see that in moments. It's daunting to cover race or speak up in regards to race at a workplace. It's also hard for that as far as gender and LGBTQ plus rights, and really having those discussions so you can see the change happening. You can be a part of the change happening. That's what I do as a filmmaker. I do a lot of inclusive work with helping production companies build teams. Are you telling a story that centers someone from a Black community or Black and brown families or disabled community? Where are the people in those key roles that can help you shape that story? And for most people, they have never been challenged. It's just been the main dominant group of people who are often not people of color who have been in those key roles to shepherd those stories. And they have not always been correctly, shaped. They just have not been. You can tell when people from the community, that's not really our experience. So it's not an authentic story. So what is the issue with having those inclusive voices, those voices that can shape that story accurately? What are we doing to build those teams? Yeah.
And finally, send us out on a high note. Everything feels a little heavy from time to time. And doing the work that you do probably takes a toll on just your mental health and your social battery. How do you both find joy and disconnect from work?
Wow. Well, so one thing I will say, you probably saw part of the answer for for this in the documentary. Our dogs.
Oh, there's A+ level dogs.
Our
It's really
dogs
good.
got us through the pandemic. I will not lie to you.
True.
And continue to do so. Shout out to Ginger. Ginger says, hello, princess.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Love it.
But yeah, I mean, you do have to unplug, have to kind of take that downtime. The election's certainly not going anywhere. Racism and misogyny certainly aren't going anywhere. So yeah, I mean, go see the art, go take the vacation. Try to just, really take time with your friends and your family and the things that you care about. I mean, that is something that I think I got a lot more intentional about in the pandemic and coming out of the other side of it. So yeah, shout out to my group chat and my therapist because they've been holding me down.
And we loved the cameo that your mom had on
Yes.
speakerphone on the documentary as well.
Fun fact, Erin, my mom has now retaken up paint by numbers thanks to Kate's influence. So sure, she's painting by numbers again.
Okay, that's great news. Great update. Princess, same question for you.
Yeah, I probably should invest in a therapist. It's a lot of work. I should do that, Erin. I contribute a lot of my poise and grace to my upbringing with my parents because they both went through segregation, schools segregated to schools unsegregated. It's only one generation away. And so despite all the challenges they went through, they still taught myself and my brothers love. It was never like hatred or these group of folks did this to us. So it's like a rebound effect of anger and war. It was just, how can you be your best self to improve humanity? So I think just something within my culture, what I'm used to from a lot of my uncles, aunts, grandparents, it was just like, what are we doing to improve culture? Like it's improve humanity. It despite all the hatred and harm that we have faced, we still move forward in a positive light and find that way to stay positive. What can you do? Don't always say what this person should be doing or that. Okay, so what can you do to help facilitate that change? And it's definitely hard. You've got to find a way to heal. As a person who does that, it does require a lot of activism work. A lot of people don't have it in there. They're tired. Everyone's different. So if I know that I can use my voice and I'm not that afraid to speak up for change, or maybe come to someone and say, hey, what you said at a workplace was extremely harmful, and here are the reasons why. Maybe no one's ever told them that. And someone did tell me that. Thank you for pulling me to the side and giving me that breakdown on how what I've been saying could be harmful to other people in the room. So, I think everyone should find their own way where they can affect change in a positive way that can move us forward through humanity.
Well, Erin Haines and Princess Hairston, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This was a really great interview. Listeners, the 19th documentary, Breaking the News, is now out on PBS, and you can watch it for free. And we are going to link it in show notes, and you definitely should watch it.
We loved it.
It is inspiring and great. Yeah. And thank you both for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for all y'all are doing for democracy.